Well, hey everybody, Pastor Steve here. Thank you for joining me today for our devotion and our Bible reading plan. We are wrapping up the book of 1 Corinthians today. We're in chapter 16. I hope you've already read that chapter. Let me ask you to do a favor for me. Tomorrow we start 2 Corinthians chapter 1. Would you share this devotion, whether you're watching the video on YouTube or something, or you're listening to the podcast? Share it with others on social media. Invite others to join us tomorrow so God can work in their lives as they read the Word and take part in these devotions with us. I appreciate you doing that. Thank you so much. All right, 1 Corinthians 16, there are several things in this chapter that kind of warm my heart. That just are a blessing and an encouragement to me. Paul ends this chapter the way he does a lot of his books, not all, but most of his books. The first thing that blesses me is in this chapter, he mentions all these other believers, all these other servants of Jesus who were really important to the church in that time. Some of them were preachers and ministry associates of Paul. Others of them were, lay people who loved Jesus and really served faithfully in the church. He mentions them by name. Some of them are names that we recognize from other places in the New Testament. Some of them are names that this is the only place we read anything about them, but they mattered at that moment in time to that church, to God's people there. And I love the way Paul recognized that he was part of something bigger than just himself. Because the gospel, the church, the kingdom of God, the work of God in this world is larger than any one person or one preacher. It's larger than any one disciple. It's larger than any one church or one city. It's bigger than any one group, any one denomination. God's work is, God's got a lot of people in a lot of different places, and there's a lot of variety within God's people. Don't ever think that you have to be like us, be part of God's family. No, yet you have to love Jesus. But there's a lot of differences among people who love Jesus. That's okay. I love that Paul recognized he was part of a team. It's not just about me and it's not just about you. It blesses me when I read the way he honors these different servants of Jesus. A second thing, I love Paul's heart, because I get the sense in this chapter that Paul wanted to be a lot of different places at the same time, but knew he couldn't. He wanted to be in Corinth. He wanted to be in Jerusalem. He wanted to be where he was. And what that says to me is that Paul's heart was big, but his vision was big. And he knew he couldn't be everywhere doing everything he would like to do. He had to be where he was, doing what he's supposed to do there. But he had big dreams and big visions. And I love that about Paul, that his heart just went places. And here's the thing, if your heart is not big and your vision is not big, you'll never move beyond where you already are. Word to the wise. A third thing that blesses me in this chapter is that Paul, in one verse, repeats what I think is the theme of the whole book. Remember, this was a church that was very divided over many, many different issues, and Paul is constantly trying to tell them, would you all settle down a little bit? Look at what he says in verse 14. In verse 14 of chapter 16, he says, let all that you do be done in love. Let all that you do be done in love. That's the theme of this book. It's chapter 13 where he has those great verses about what love is. He defines love and says it's the more excellent way, more important than all the other things. He's trying in this book, as he deals with all these issues that they were divided and arguing over, to say, hey, focus on edifying the whole body, not just what you want. Stop fighting and start loving. Stop fighting over all this stuff and start loving one another in practical ways. It's not just about me. It's not just about you. That theme is all through the book, and he summarizes it so well in that one verse. A fourth thing that blesses me in this chapter is that, as I said, Paul has big dreams. But he knows that doing great things does not come without obstacles. That great opportunities quite often are faced with obstacles. Look at what he says in verse 9. verse 9. He said, a wide door for effective service or effective ministry has opened for me. He said, where I am right now, there's this tremendous opportunity to do great work for God, to expand the kingdom, to share the gospel, and a wide door, a grand opportunity to do great ministry, effective ministry for the Lord. But he ends verse 9 by saying, and there are many adversaries. I have opponents. There's obstacles. Sometimes people think, if it's God's will for me to do something, there's not obstacles. It's easy that you're trying to make a decision, and if there's a challenge, if there's a barrier, if there's an obstacle, some people automatically take that as a sign that God says no. Where do you get that from? The truth is, in life, most dreams worth having, most goals worth accomplishing, most great things that God calls us to do in life, there will be challenges, there will be obstacles, there will even be people who don't agree with you. Just because there's an obstacle doesn't mean it's not of God. Paul said, I have this great opportunity. There's obstacles. I don't say it much anymore because it's not a challenge in my particular ministry at First Baptist Rock Hill, but there was a time years and years and years ago when it wasn't. And I used to have to remind myself and talk to other pastors, don't lead a church based on the negative minority. Don't lead a church based on the negative minority, because I don't care what you do for Jesus' sake. Somebody's not going to like it. And if you're always listening to the negative minority, letting the squeaky wheel run things, you'll never do anything great. I'm just saying. And then the fifth and final thing that blesses me is I think Paul really wanted the people in this church to know how much he loved them. Remember, Paul started this church. Okay, he birthed it, so it was special to him. But it was a divided church, an immature church, and in this letter, Paul at times is very direct, very forward with them, very blunt. I mean, at times he kind of smacks them around a little bit, you might say. Kind of rough. He deals with the stuff. And that's what grace does. See, sometimes ignoring problems is not the loving thing. But Paul, I think, really wants them to know that even though he had been so direct and instructive with them, he wanted them to know he really did love them. And the way he did that was, when Paul would send letters to churches, like the two letters to the church at Corinth, 1st, 2nd Corinthians, the letter to the church at Ephesus, the book of Ephesians, the two letters to the church in Thessalonica, 1st, 2nd Thessalonians. Paul dictated his letters to someone, to a secretary. He did not write them himself. He dictated them and somebody wrote it down for him. That's what he did in 1 Corinthians. But at the end of 1 Corinthians, to let them know that he loved them and they were special, he signed the letter in his own handwriting. Look at verse 21. He said, the greeting is in my own hand. And then in my translation, it's Paul. So in the original manuscript, the secretary would have written the greeting is in my own hand, and then Paul would have signed it. And that may not seem like a big deal, but that special touch, I think, was Paul saying to these people, you're special to me. I love you. I care about you. I really like chapter 16. It just blesses me. I hope it's been a blessing to you. I'll see you tomorrow as we start 2 Corinthians chapter 1.